Hello and welcome to American Friction. I'm Jacob Jarvis.
And I'm Chris Jones.
We had already recorded a full episode this week, but this was before the fatal shooting of Trump ally and Turning Point USA founder Charlie Kirk. This has sent shockwaves across the world, and some of the discussion around it has been, let's say, confused. So we wanted to take a few moments to talk through it ourselves and the questions that it raises. Before we begin, it obviously goes without saying that political violence is unacceptable, no matter what side people might deem themselves to be on. But Chris, we want to be able to have a robust conversation about this, at least, don't we? The details of the shooter are unknown at the moment, and we'll come on to that. Do you think people are discussing this with enough caution so far, given that?
I think largely there is caution there, especially from the big broadcasters and those who are abiding by media law, especially those that are written, because I mean we've both worked in that world. We know how stringent lawyers can really be on the stuff that you can publish and you can't. But I think it's when it comes to social media is where the problems are laying most heavy at the moment. You go onto the likes of Twitter and it's a bin fire of conspiracy theories. But it always is, I guess. When things like this happen and it's so public and it happens to such a public figure, there's always questions left unanswered, and that's really what brings about the conspiracy theories. You know, people want to know what happened, why it happened, and who did it. And at the moment, with the fatal shooting of Charlie Kirk, we just don't have those answers. So there are always and were always going to be people who spout nonsense and grift. Let's face it, they grift for attention off the back of this kind of stuff.
I mean, the person that I think to me that really stands out as being one of the most irresponsible around it is who you'd expect, and comes down to Donald Trump. And the thing that I am finding the most concerning is people creating this narrative ahead of time that this is someone from the radical left, as Trump has said it. And I think we do need to be cautious on this, because when we have seen political violence in the past, it is very often that the political leanings of the person involved are much less clear-cut than might be expected, generally quite muddled, and as well, usually very confused, and not something that we should be wanting to promote on their behalf. We don't want to push their message forward, and also not wanting to paint and characterize a whole group of people as being connected to them. That's what I find really depressing in these situations. Is as far as we understand at the moment, this is someone who has acted alone. We don't even know that. There may be some sort of conspiracy around it. I don't want to suggest it, but all we know is that Charlie Kirk has been shot. Someone pulled the trigger. We know so limited amounts about that person, and Trump to be saying the radical left, and for it to be put on that, I do think is very concerning, when we've seen how he will take any excuse he can to push forward his agenda and push forward the grasp on power he has, push the limits of his power. And I do find it concerning that likely that he will use this to do that. So I think I would agree with you that on the whole, broadcasters, I mean, there's a couple we need to get into, but on the whole, news broadcasters have been quite measured. Social media does look to have been a bin fire from both sides, and hands up on both sides. I think we can't take the left out of that as well. They've been saying some horrible shit, and the right of them making bizarre calls for retribution. But it just another depressing example for me of the commander-in-chief you'd hope to set the tone, not setting the tone. I mean, on things we don't know. I mean, there's so much, isn't there? And then also they've caught the shooter. They've caught suspected shooters twice, and then released people. So it is completely all over the place, isn't it? And it also appears to me to be highlighting that maybe America just isn't equipped to handle this sort of crime at the moment.
Well, yeah, there's a whole lot we don't know. As I mentioned in the last answer, we don't know who or why what they even used to do this. And you're right, they have taken into custody 2 suspects as we're recording right now on Thursday. They were released by the Utah Department of Public Safety, and they've released a statement. And I'll read that statement because it is important that we these people's names have been out there. And I think it's important for our listeners to know that these people have been released. So this statement reads, it says, "We initially took in George Zinn as a suspect. He was later released and charged with obstruction by UVU police. A second suspect, Zachariah Qureshi, was taken into custody and released after interrogation with law enforcement. There are no current ties to the shooting with either of these individuals. There is an ongoing investigation and manhunt for the shooter." And as you say, that investigation is very much going on as we speak. It might change by the time this comes out, but right now there's just a whole lot we don't know. And but when it comes to policing this kind of action, this kind of crime, I do have some kinds of sympathy with law enforcement in the US, because it must be really difficult in a country where, realistically, a lot of people, not most, but a lot of people can walk into a gun store and come out with one on the same day. Whether you're a good person or not, or whether you're deemed fit to carry a weapon or purchase a weapon in the first place, those people can still be corrupted. Those people can still change. Yeah. So how do you keep on top of that? And how do you police events like this to stop things like this from happening? Because this isn't the president of the United States, and we already saw that there was one assassination attempt and another attempted assassination attempt as well, and that is going through the courts right now with Ryan Ruth. But it must be really difficult to police this kind of situation. But I think you're right. I think it is clearly not well equipped enough to deal with things like this.
I saw some estimate. There's basically no, which I find there's so many guns in America that no one really knows exactly how many guns there are in America, basically. But there is an estimate that there are over 500 million guns in the civilian gun stock alone. So that's discounting the ability of people to be able to get guns out of circulation from the military, from police, and wherever else. That is just a baffling amount of guns. More than one gun per person, like close to 2 guns per person. This has to be just surely noted that the only thing we do know about this situation is it might not have happened if the person did not have... Well, it would not have happened if the person did not have access to a gun. That is about the only thing we do know. So, to me, that just seems one of the biggest ones. And the other thing, I know you spoke to Ben Maku recently, and we're speaking about sort of rise of the far right, but he's big on national security and the threats posed by sort of militia groups and such. And he's spoken before about just the concerns of how the FBI has been run, how intelligence agencies have been run, and we're seeing them being constantly diminished, constantly undermined. We're seeing sort of calls for retribution towards people who are investigating issues around January 6th and stuff such as that. We know Kash Patel is big conspiracy theorist in charge of that. And so, yeah, on the sympathies for law enforcement, for somewhere like the FBI, which should be such a... You would hope that within America, the government would admire it as an institution and want to back it. And it is just it's having its legs cut out from underneath it. And so I don't really know how it can then be expected to assist in intelligence for this sort of thing, and know, if they do come into play to be involved in this situation, they've got one arm tied behind their back, really.
Well, yeah, it's like most or a lot of institutions in the US right now. It's just being torn apart. I mean, you look at what's happening in the CDC most recently, another arm of the US system, which has been set up to do good, that is now facing complete hardship and basically unable to operate in the way that it should be operating. And that's kind of what's happened to the FBI. You mentioned Ben McHugh. The thing he was saying to me that really struck me was that they've stopped looking into a lot of these far-right groups. And that's emboldening the likes of political violence to become more consistent, more frequent within the US. And that's a serious problem. Now, I'm not saying that is in relation to this incident with Charlie Kirk whatsoever. But the atmosphere for political violence, as we've seen throughout the election, we saw loads of stuff. There was also in Minnesota, there was political violence most recently there as well. It seems to be happening a lot in the US, and it really does seem that there needs to be more focus upon law and order in the right places. And that doesn't seem to be happening, and that's really concerning.
Well, I completely think it is justified to look at that America does feel as though it's becoming a more violent place, and some of that is coming from the actions of the administration in charge. And again, I'm not saying that they face any blame towards this happening for Charlie Kirk. I want to reiterate that I believe the blame is going to be placed on whatever individual is eventually caught for it. But yeah, you have to take it into context that America is just feeling increasingly violent. We are constantly hearing violent talk towards people that members of the administration and people on that side of the argument do not like. And that is coming from the top. And I'm not going to say that there aren't. I've seen some really grim stuff said by people on the left online. Again, not the majority. Most people I'm seeing on social media seem to be saying, this is completely fucked. We condemn it. There's been, plenty of people, I'm sure, because millions of people are discussing it, who will have said some bad stuff, of course. But you can't help but thinking that the top-down normalization of speaking about people you dislike in a violent way is having some impact on the climate. On the news report side of things, obviously, you and me have done live television before. It can be pretty high pressure. An MSNBC commentator, Matthew Dowd. So he's a political analyst. He's been fired because of comments he made. And this is basically textbook. This is like sort of if I were to have a nightmare of appearing on national television and just saying stuff I shouldn't say and it coming back on me. This is about as textbook as it gets, isn't it? I mean, he basically suggested that hateful thoughts lead to hateful words and they lead to hateful actions, but then also suggested a supporter shooting their gun off in celebration could have been what caused this. I mean, it's bad, basically.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, for people who haven't done live television, this is usually how it works, especially when you're working remotely or on location. You'll work with a producer who will feed you a list of questions that the anchor will then read so that you have time to prepare what you're saying. This doesn't always happen, and I've never done a live hit for MSNBC, so I can't say for sure that this is exactly what happened. But in most occasions, you will know the questions beforehand. So that kind of takes what he said. You have to take it a little bit more seriously. It doesn't seem like it was perhaps something, from my knowledge, if this is what had happened, it wasn't off the cuff. But what he said, as you've rightly pointed out, and has now got him fired, is we don't know if this was a supporter firing their gun off in celebration of what Charlie Kirk was saying. And then he went on to say something else. He said that Kirk was one of the most divisive, especially divisive younger figures in this, who was constantly sort of pushing hate speech aimed at certain groups. And I always go back to hateful thoughts lead to hateful words, which then lead to hateful actions. I think that's the environment we're in. He then did go on to apologize afterwards on social media. He said that, let me be clear, I in no way intended for my comments to blame Kirk for this horrendous attack. Let us all come together and condemn violence of any kind. But the damage is already done. He said what he said at a particularly insensitive time. This was reaction program essentially that we were seeing. And you've got to be careful what you're saying at that time. I think when it comes to reporting and journalism, especially when it's live, especially when you're talking about something like this, stick to the facts, avoid speculation that could be seen as controversial, because it will be seen as controversy and it will get you into trouble, and it will also get the broadcaster that you're talking with into trouble as well, and that leads to firings. But more than anything, just don't say things like this when you come to reporting on these kinds of topics. Stick to the facts.
Yeah, one thing I suppose though, to then get into the sort of the speculation and the talking around it is, obviously we're coming now to the point of there will be obituaries written about Charlie Kirk, and as I mentioned, Charlie Kirk is a father, a husband, 31 years old. This is heinous. It's obviously completely heinous what's happened to him. Apparently his family were in attendance at this event. I honestly can't imagine what they are going through. But obituaries are, they a record of history, and the beginning of a record of history. There is going to have to be some reckoning here with some of the things he said, which perhaps shouldn't be handled in a crass way, but might lead to more of a conversation around things such as guns, like we were discussing earlier. So I saw there was a piece, basically, this was in Newsweek, which has again been doing the rounds in maybe a way that I don't agree with how it is being shared at the moment. But the headline is Charlie Kirk says gun deaths unfortunately worth it to keep Second Amendment. And that is an incredibly unfortunate headline to look back upon. Now we are where we are.
Sure.
Is there some hope that this could perhaps spark a constructive conversation around that, to see that someone who did advocate for this sort of thing has become a victim of it? I'm not sure. Do you hold any hope that could? 'Cause that is my one thought at the moment of this, where perhaps there can be some good in this stretching out that conversation.
I think perhaps the trap that you're falling into there is that you aren't considering that there isn't a sane administration in charge right now, and the decisions that are being made shouldn't be made, and are actively harming the country, but also dividing the country as well, tearing the country apart in many places. You just have to look at LA, DC, and Chicago and what's going on there. I'm pretty sure the people involved in living in those cities and seeing what they're seeing their governments doing by bringing in the National Guard, pretty sure they're not happy right now, and very distrusting of what the Trump administration is doing. But when it comes to constructive conversations, I don't think I've seen any evidence of any meaningful change in the US at the moment, from what I've seen mostly. And like you say, it is coming from all directions. But what I've seen mostly, and this could just be because of what I focus on, but statements from people on the right, from the likes of Fox News, that are really drilling into this being a war almost.
Yeah.
In fact, no, not almost. They've said it. They've said things like "this is war," and really feeding into that divisiveness, that drift that we're seeing amongst American citizens. So I think any kind of logical and meaningful conversations around gun control, for example, I think it's miles off.
I mean, I unfortunately saw the video of this, and
Yeah.
I hope that most people listening avoided that, because it was really not something you want to see. I know that I believe Blue Sky put restrictions on it. I'm not sure if Twitter has. It seemed to be everywhere around, but this is from the New York Times reporting on it. But that when Charlie Kirk was shot, someone had just asked him, "Do you know how many mass shooters there have been in America in the last 10 years?" he responded, counting or not counting gang violence, and that is then when he was shot in the neck. So for this to be an issue of such pressing concern to be what he was debating at the moment he was shot. If that doesn't shake people across the political spectrum to want to sort of get into it, I have no idea what will. On the extremes of both sides saying, so you mentioned a bit on the sort of that this is a war side. There very much is a concern here that, as I mentioned at the start, that Trump has been blaming us on the radical left, and some members of what I would describe as the more radical right, they are speaking as though they have some sort of bloodlust because of this, aren't they? And we've seen reports around that.
Yeah, there's 3 quotes that I've got here that have particularly struck me. And so the first one is from Elon Musk, and he blamed the entirety of the left of politics, essentially, on Twitter when he tweeted, "The left is the party of murder." There's also another one here from Sean Davis, who's the CEO and co-founder of The Federalist. He posted on X, "I hope that Trump also orders the extermination of the entire anarcho-terrorist network that has been terrorizing Christians in this nation unabated for more than a decade." And then Jesse Waters, who we know well, he's of Fox News, kind of like the second coming of Tucker Carlson in some ways. And he said this, he said, "Whether we want to accept it or not, they are at war with us. And what are we going to do about it? How much political violence are we going to tolerate?" And then the libs of TikTok posted, "This is war." Very, very to the point. But a lot of these people on the right, they use, as you mentioned at the top of the show, they use the word they. They categorize this as when things like this happens, it's the mass that are responsible rather than the individual, even though the individual is likely not associated to the mass at all.
Yeah.
And they can't get past that.
Something that I have found striking around all of this as well. Do you think this is also interesting in that it's really showing us how this administration and maybe politics at the moment is so much more the sort of real world and online space have converged more than we've ever seen? Because, for example, I've seen people like Josh Shapiro say there's going to be flags at half-mast for Charlie Kirk in Pennsylvania. And I'll be honest in that I imagine that until this event happened, huge amounts of people in Pennsylvania probably didn't know who Charlie Kirk was. Charlie Kirk isn't elected to any sort of position. He's a very famous person if you are involved or interested in politics and that world and online politics. Obviously, there was he was sort of parodied on South Park, which perhaps will have gained him some more attention. But yeah, to me, I think this really just is showing how they are making their decisions based on things that are happening online and acting towards what they see online. And I don't know about you, I'd be interested to know your thoughts on it, but to me, I also find that very worrying on the divisiveness, because the bad stuff we are talking about has been people posting online. And I think it's very important for us to disconnect how people behave online and what people online behave like from what most people in America behave like. If you look at polling in America, most people in America believe that political violence is a problem. It's a problem that is out of hand. They don't want it to be. And so, yeah, do you think there's some worry that this administration of the people will act upon what they see on the internet, which is very much not actually representative of how America feels about stuff?
It's a good question. I'm not really sure how to answer, apart from the fact that there's obviously a reason why Donald Trump is so online all of the time, and it's because he has an audience there and he has people that will listen to him, and that's how he garners a lot of his support, I guess. I mean, it only takes half an hour on True Social to really know how Trump thinks. And maybe that is a strategy that if Trump puts himself out there on social media as often as he does, the people that follow him feel like they know him and feel like, well, they're part of something, and that something, I guess, we would call a cult. And as we've talked about many times before, but I don't. It's hard with Donald Trump and the online space, because he is a serious person, but he also isn't. If this was anyone else that spoke the way he spoke on social media, no one would take it seriously. But because he is who he is, people take what he says as gospel and they act on it. But not only act on it, they take it further. And I think it feeds into their anger, if they have anger, and perhaps causes things to happen that shouldn't happen. January 6th, for example, being a key example of that. So I guess that's kind of my best answer to that, but it's a good point.
Just on to wrap up, just looking at the sort of gun violence side of things, and the Gun Violence Archive, I saw they keep track of gun violence in the US, and so this was a post from them a couple of days ago. So the numbers will be higher than these numbers as well at this point, but there have been more than 10,200 gun deaths, more than 18,800 gun injuries, and more than 295 mass shootings in 2025 so far. So again, I suppose to me, it's like the only thing we can really firmly reiterate at the moment is something has to be done about the climate in the US, which is encouraging political violence. We need, there has to be some thought around addressing what is making people behave in the ways they are behaving. Again, though, as I say, how we can pin down this as political violence. He's a political figure. Someone's been violent towards him. It appears to be targeted. We still don't know what the political driver of that is, though. But the only firm thing we can show is that guns are a massive problem in the US. Shootings are a massive problem in the US, and we've talked about this so many times. I can't imagine how exasperating it must feel if you're an American to be living through this. It's just,
it's terrifying. Yeah.
That's the only thing I suppose I would reiterate, that if people do want to speak firmly and boldly about something in connection to this issue, that's perhaps the most constructive thing they can discuss at this moment. Chris, thanks for jumping on and talking to me about all of this.
It's a pleasure to talk to you, Jarv.
Yeah, I know it is. And all of you back home, thank you very much for listening in to the show. And also just particularly to any of you, if you are in America and are feeling scared and upset about this sort of thing, I'm just, I think our thoughts are with you, and very much sorry that this is a climate that you're having to put up with at the moment. So and thank you for listening. As we always say, if you want us to help keep this podcast going, we'd really appreciate if you can support us. You can do that by rating and reviewing the show or subscribing wherever you're listening. And you can also back us on Patreon, patreon.com/American Friction. This has been an extra episode, so we'll have the usual episode will come out as well. So make sure you look out for that soon. I'm Jacob Jarvis. This is American Friction.